Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms where I give you a heads up about upcoming shows and which date and time they will be aired. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the shows, MP3 files which you can download, or links to your favorite platform like iTunes, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and all other major sources. You can find information for upcoming and past talk show appearances as well as new book projects at MarlenePardo.com. You can also purchase books and merchandise there. And you can visit my author page on Amazon at Marlene Pardo Pellicer. Due to popular demand, I'm narrating my True Believer stories that I've collected throughout the years in a new series called Supernatural Storytime. You can find links at supernaturalstorytime.com. If you are into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate some of those at Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If you would like to read noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I do want to thank you all for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing today? Good, I hope. Everything is great here on my little micro farm, as you all know. Today, I have a super interesting guest. And, of course, you know that usually has to do something with ghost hunting. Because even though there's a lot of things in the paranormal, under the umbrella of the paranormal, ghost hunting, for those people that are active in the field, that, like I said, I always like to hear about the different stories, different experiences from the people out there, because all these different investigators have their own stories, their own approaches, their own experiences, their own after effects. Because, you know, I've talked a lot about sometimes getting into this field is just not strictly going out there and doing an investigation. Once you're in it for a bit, you sometimes it kind of seeps into the rest of your life, which is, you know, when I've talked about boundaries. But anyway, let me tell you about today's guest. And his name is Rich Newman. Now, he's worked in video game and film production for over 10 years. He's the author of 7 books, and he's the producer director of 2 feature films. At the end, we're gonna mention again his websites, and I'll have him on the credits of the show, but his production website is elsinoreproductions.com, excuse me, and paranormalincorporated.com. And right now, as a matter of fact, I just confirmed with him, he is working on a new book that is yet to be released, but should be released very soon, which is titled The Disembodied. And we're going to ask him about that. But anyway, let's bring him on. How are you doing today, Rich?
Great. How are you doing?
Great. Fantastic. Now, I'm going to ask you, all my audience knows that I always ask my guests this. How did you get involved in the paranormal? Childhood experience, something you did it as an adult? How did that come about?
Well, I definitely was one of those people, you know, that had to go out and test all the local urban legends growing up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the big one that we had was I grew up outside of Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
Okay.
And the big tale that went around through school was called the cemetery that would have this thing called green eyes.
Ooh.
And you were supposed to go into the cemetery, and this certain tombstone would have this apparition with green eyes that would rise up out of it.
Okay.
And so everybody would come from, 100 miles away to go into the cemetery and sit at night. I'm sure this drove the caretaker crazy. Everyone out there looking for these green eyes.
It was like, oh my God,
But,
yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, I was definitely one of those guys, watching, the shows Sightings and Unexplained and testing out the urban legends and all that stuff for sure.
And So what happened? This is what, and I know, you know what? I've heard a lot of people do that. They do like either on a lark or legend tripping, and then they get hooked on it. Is that how it worked for you, or did you have an actual experience?
Yeah, well, I've had an actual experience when I was a child. I had one of the houses that I lived in had a ghost that just loved to open one particular door in the house.
Really?
And it's the most boring ghost story ever, because you would just, people would come over and I'd tell them, well, that door over there, it will open by itself. And they'll be like, oh, no, And they'd go over and they'd test it, make sure the door was completely closed, jiggle the handle, all that stuff. And then you'd be sitting there watching TV, and you'd hear the doorknob actually turn because it had kind of a creaky knob,
Right.
You'd hear this kind of a clink, 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 and then the door would swing open. But the ghost never did anything else. It was just this really boring ghost. And it's like the most boring ghost story to tell people. But that was definitely something I would say that piqued my interest in wanting to figure out.
So it was just, it was that one door, but it was the actual turning of the doorknob, which is interesting. Okay.
You would actually see the doorknob turn. Yeah.
And what was the one room? What led to the other? Was like this like a well used area of the house, or what? From what room to the other room did it go to?
Well, this was like a really small house, and I had a large family, and so my bedroom actually was before, I think, was the formal dining room of all things. And so this would have been, back in the day, like a dining room pantry / closet, like in about the 20s and 30s. Because this was like a 1920s, 30s house. Okay. And, and so it became my bedroom closet. And so, it was really interesting to me. The ghost would kind of mess with you about it, too, though, because you could sit up and wait for it, and nothing would happen, and you think, okay. And then as soon as you would turn off the light and get into bed, the door would open.
You know what? I guess, though, after a while. How long were you living there? Were you there for a while?
Oh, I was there about 5 or 6 years, yeah.
And I guess after a while, didn't it kind of fade away, like, because that's as bad as it got? Or
that's it. Yeah, I always waited for something else to happen. I always thought, maybe I'll see something one night. I'll wake up, someone be standing here, or I hear a voice, or, but nothing. I got so used to it. I would have friends come over and spend the night, and I would say, oh yeah, in passing, I would just say, the closet's haunted. So if it opens by itself, don't pay any attention to it.
Right, because you're thinking crazy. Any minute now they're gonna wig out on me, thinking, hey man, somebody's coming in, but nobody's there.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's a great story, though, because you know what? Everybody thinks that good ghost stories have to be something really horrific. And sometimes these stories, I think, like what you just told right now, are great. Because, sometimes ghosts that's all they are. That one thing. It doesn't have to be over the top, or, it was breathing on my face while I was sleeping, or nothing like that. But it's there, it's, and like you said, almost like, because I even wanted to say it's a residual, but then you're telling me when you're waiting for it, it doesn't happen, which leads me to believe maybe there was some type of maybe intelligence behind it, because otherwise it would just happen, forget it, whether you're waiting for it or not. That's a great story, though. And it makes you think, in that little area of the pantry and the thing, you could see where maybe there was some type of significance. Because I tell everybody sometimes, everybody thinks, and I'm talking here residential hauntings. I say, once upon a time, the kitchen, dining room area, especially the kitchen or the area of cooking, this is the place where a lot of activity would take place. Besides the cooking, a lot of families would congregate sometimes in the kitchen. Things take place in kitchens, versus sometimes when, you think of the spooky bedrooms or things like that. Sometimes the center of activity in a house would be in one particular area like that. So that's very interesting. So what happened? You went to the cemetery looking for old green eyes, and then did you find it?
And nothing happened.
Okay.
Which is a great thing to have happen when you're young, because it's when you start figuring out, it goes beyond urban legends and stories, and sometimes, digging deep into the history behind things and learning more about a location and spending more time doing actual ghost hunting rather than, sort of like you said, legend tripping all the time. It was great to learn that quick because that made me get it, like I said, watch shows like Unexplained and Sightings and learn about, great haunted places. And growing up in Missouri, we have some doozies, and the Lemp Mansion was, not that far away. We would go up and, save up our money and go and stay at the Lemp Mansion and things like, do things like that. And Crescent Hotel is south of there, and that's a great spot. And so, yeah, and in Memphis, where I am now, too, is a great central location for all these as well.
Yeah, and sometimes people are not aware historically of the location of some of these places. I think close to the Lemp Mansion, they used to, and I don't know if it's still standing, but they had an insane asylum there and a hospital across the street that they built like around the, post-Civil War era. And I don't know if they're standing because, a lot of these buildings, they demolished them or things like that. But it was like one across the street from the other. And I was always thinking, man, I would love to go investigate this. You've got an insane asylum across the street from a hospital. Of all places, this was, I want to say, God, I want to say it was post-Civil War. And back in St. Louis, they had they had a lot of prostitution or brothels. How's that? Not the streetwalker things, but, these mansions where,
Sure.
And the do-gooders, trying to do good, put up a hospital just for women, mostly trying to entice these women to come in and get medical checkups. And, of course, this was, the government was paying for it. The problem turned out that if you were a prostitute and you went into this one hospital and you had some type of disease, they wouldn't let you out until you were cured. So guess what? After a few months, the program kind of fell apart because once it got out that, hey, once you go in there to get treatment, they don't let you out. They don't release you until you're cured. And then it just, right. And then it just turned into like a regular hospital, but of course, back then they would build these huge buildings, and I don't know if it's still standing or not, but it was very close to that area of the older area of where the Lemp Mansion is located. But yeah, it was one of those places I was like, man, these walls could talk if they're still standing. But let me ask you, also Missouri, aren't there some caves that are also said to be haunted? Or am I wrong?
Well, actually, Lemp Mansion is associated with caves that run under the mansion that they would store beer in.
Right, right. That they had,
very limited access to those. Yeah,
I heard that, and well, that's a very tragic family. They had a lot of things going on, but I've heard, and I don't know why every place that has either caves or basements or stuff, they have really, really dark hauntings. But that family in and of itself, I mean, despite all their money and everything, their fortune, they seem to have been a very unlucky family when it came to like happiness anyway. Did you ever get a chance to investigate the Lemp Mansion at all or no?
I did. I've been up there quite a few times, and man, that's a place where you never know what's going to happen. You can have one evening that's just, mellow, nothing happening, not a single thing going on, and then the next just crazy stuff. Voices talking out of thin air beside you, doors opening, closing, things being moved around, just crazy stuff. As a great example, for the last 3 years, I've been shooting off and on with a television show from Japan that's produced by Fuji TV, and we went up there and did an episode at Lemp Mansion.
Okay.
And we're sitting there in the room monitoring this, the second room where a guy is sleeping, to see if something's going to happen to him. And this guy, he's so tired because, he's waxed out because he's flown all the way from Japan.
Right.
So he hit the bed and, boom, he's out. And we see this perfect ball of light, like a floating, not an orb, an actual glowing ball of light. A door opened and a ball of light comes into the room, hovers there in the doorway, and then goes back out into the hall.
Wow. Almost like checking him out?
And my first instinct was really practical, and I thought, I really hope that's not somebody who just came in the mansion and he's got a flashlight, because that's not a great part of town, and break-ins and things happen. So we actually all went running into the hall outside this guy's door just to make sure there wasn't a guy out there, because the light was so bright.
Right.
You know how when you shine a flashlight into infrared camera, it kind of blanks it out?
Yes.
And nothing was there. No, it was just a perfect ghost light floating in the room, looking around and leaving on camera.
Wow. And he had no idea. He didn't feel anything, nothing.
He slept through everything.
Wow. Well, you know what? It wouldn't be the first time. Especially when you have a place that has intelligent hauntings where they come in to check out the new person. Like, who is this? So, I mean,
oh,
why
my
not?
Goodness.
I've heard of that. I've heard of that. That they have that sentience. In other words, that they, how sometimes they have some hauntings where the discarnate is totally unaware. They're out doing their thing and they have little or no interaction with any living person there. And then there's others that are totally aware of who and what's going on, including when somebody new, especially is sleeping there. Because they've made it's there's a restaurant, what is it, on the premises, and then they have a hotel as part of the building as well?
Yeah, they have like a little restaurant downstairs and like a lounge. Mm-hmm. You can go down. Yeah.
And let me ask you, do they think?
I would tell you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say. Well, go ahead and ask me the question about this, because I have a really funny one I'll tell you about.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Oh, did you have? Oh,
well, no. That I was going to ask you, but I'll ask you after the story. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, one of the other shows that we did for the Japanese show was at the Crescent Hotel.
Okay.
And this one was hilarious because I've never seen a ghost get frustrated with trying to do stuff. And I believe that's exactly what we saw that night, because we had this poor guy come in from Japan, and they're always so tired when they get here to the States from the jet lag and the 18-hour flight. So this guy goes straight into his room, crawls in the bed, crashes out. Well, the ghost in the room does not want him to be there. And so the first thing the ghost does is it clicks on a floor lamp in the room. Oh. Well, the guy's so tired, he doesn't even react to it. So a few minutes later, we're all freaking out because we're watching the camera like, that light just turned on by itself.
Okay.
And then a few seconds later, that light turns back off. And so we think, okay. And then right beside the bed where the guy is sleeping, on his bedside little nightstand, it turns a lamp on right in the guy's face, and the guy doesn't react.
So it's like, okay,
so
what do I need to do with this guy? Hit him with a 2x4?
I know. So then the ghost opens the closet door beside the bed. You actually see the doorknob turn and the closet door just swing wide open, and the guy doesn't react. So then, so then the ghost flicks off the lamp that's next to the bed now, and he still doesn't wake up, and then nothing else happens. I just imagine in my head the ghost storming out of the room like,
God, that's it. I'm done. Somebody might. You know what? I think that's a great story because it does. It's like almost like I said, like somebody they're aware, and they're not on their parallel universe kind of thing doing what. No, they're aware and they interact, and they're. Like he said, he's upping the ante, waiting for this person to wake up and run out of the room. And it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but jet lag has won the day on this. That is such a great story.
That was funny.
Do you have any idea who the ghost was that was doing that?
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to think of the name because there's two rooms that are kind of famous at the Crescent Hotel, and there's of course the famous the big one is they call it Michael's room. And that's the room that everyone usually tries to rent.
Okay.
And the tale goes when they were building the hotel and renovated, Michael fell about 3 stories through because the floors weren't put back in yet when they were remodeling.
Wow.
So he fell about 4 stories and then broke his neck. And so they think he haunts this room. But then there's another room, and I don't want to... And she was a nurse during the period when the Crescent Hotel was actually a cancer hospital.
Okay.
It was a fraudulent cancer hospital.
Right,
Doc Baker was actually telling people he could cure their cancer, and they weren't. They were being hauled out the back when they died.
Is this because they have the mineral, the water there also, right? Was part of the cure? Am I correct? I mean, there
Right,
was...
that's it. Yep. Eureka Springs. They got the
Right.
natural springs. That's right.
So he was luring
And
people in
so she
there.
was the nurse. Yeah, I think its name was like Theodora or something. If you stay in Theodora's room, that would be the room. And it's a really active room, obviously.
Well, yeah, but you know what? And even then, you think, I'm sure there's even probably some hangers-on that haven't been identified that maybe are a little bit on the shy side. So can you imagine you're going to this place hoping that, your life is going to be spared? Or, you've placed all your hopes on this doctor who's promised that you're going to be able to live, and then it turns out you don't. And then, to add insult to injury, like you said, he's making it, like you said, pulling the bodies out the back so nobody's aware that this person's died. Yeah, I'm sure you
Exactly.
I'm sure you've got some people there running
And
around in the
what a
background.
miserable time they would have had too, just with the pain and suffering and the amount of all of that went on in that building.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes you get the ones that are known or just have been more easily identified, but every once in a while in the background, you've got a few who are there. They're just more in the background, but it's in a setting like that, especially, well, hotels in and of themselves, you get a lot of crazy stuff, but that thing where you have people that were being brought there, promised, you were going to cure you, and, then it turns out, on the contrary. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure there's somebody there running around. Let me ask you, in the Lemp Mansion, because that's another thing. Do you think the Lemp Mansion, it's just the family, the suicides that are haunting there, or is there any other personality that's attached to that place? Because, I mean, they kind of... And the reason why I ask this is that it makes you think, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was this just an unfortunate family, or was there something wrong with this place, this house, that brought these things about? Like, did they just move into, like, build the house on the wrong spot kind of deal?
I think that's one of the sort of theories that some of the local St. Louis writers and things have put out there, that the local Indian tribes, because they use those caves and everything there as sort of their home base. And so it's been sort of surmised that maybe there was, I hate to use the old Indian burial ground kind of thing, but it kind of was, because these cave systems there were kind of the homes and where they would bury the people who died, and they would have all their ceremonies there, everything, all the religious ceremonies. And then here comes, the Lemp family, and they build their house right over the caves because they want to use those things to store beer.
Yeah, they're thinking like beer meisters. They're...
Right, yeah. And that's actually what drove them to the suicide, because when Prohibition happened, they decided they were going to try to go with their version of near beer at the time, and it just did not sell well, and they went bankrupt. And the people who were sort of used to living high on the hog, they started killing themselves one after another. Right.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, I know that. I mean, you even hear about when they had the in 1929 that the big giant, that set off the Depression, the crash on Wall Street, that there were supposedly businessmen jumping off of off the buildings. But still, this family, though, they kind of like really had a very sad history throughout. It went beyond that. So that's why you always wonder, was it... Yeah, because in other words, that happened to, were there other businessmen that got affected depending on what they did, but this whole family seemed to like just be under a dark cloud. So let me ask you, as far as, have you done any investigations in Memphis where you're at?
Well, yes. There's actually a really popular Victorian home called the Woodger Fontaine House.
Okay.
That is a non-profit, like living museum kind of situation. And we had gone there several times investigating the ghost of their most popular ghost, of a woman named Molly Fontaine. And you can actually go in, anyone who would want to tour this place, you can take an audio recorder, a camera, and go on all up the ghost spots and everything. And it's fantastic. And we've had a few interesting audio recordings come out of there, and heard people give some pretty good experiences. there's an entire stretch in Memphis that they call Victorian Village, and every house there is this nice, giant Victorian, gothy-looking, house. And all of them have these old Memphis stories, of Southern tragedies and death and things that happened during the Yellow Fever and all these, when the Civil War came through, all these different stories. And they all have such great ghost stories. And a local girl here named Laura Cunningham actually wrote a book called Haunted Memphis that details a lot of these. But, yeah, every place has these fantastic, and they're those Southern ghost stories, the good Gothic evil.
Let me ask you, because you wrote a book called Devil in the Delta, okay?
Yes.
And is that about a particular house or a family, or what is that book about?
Yeah, it was actually it's a case that I got, a private case that was down in the Delta of Mississippi.
Okay.
And it was a woman who had bought a double wide trailer and dropped it on her family's land. Okay. And no sooner had they kind of moved in than all these bizarre things started happening. And she became convinced that there was a demon in the place, that there was a demon that haunted the land. And it was such a bizarre period of my life to work on this case, because there was more going on to this family than meets the eye. One of them was strung out on drugs. There was these shady characters that would come around. A lot of things going on with drugs, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
A lot of just people kind of who wanted to be known because of having a haunted place, and they were kind of promoting it in a weird way.
Right.
And you would be just ready to write the whole story off, and you'd go there, and then something just unexplained crazy would happen in the place. Like once I was in a room, and I said, "Is anyone here?" And the entire trailer, not just the place I was sitting on, the entire trailer shook, rumbled. And I have it on audio. I actually have an audio recording of it. I put it on the website. If in the book, there references a page you can go to hear a lot of the clips and things that I got when I was working there. But I mainly wrote The Devil in the Delta because I wanted it to be a cautionary tale for people who think that ghost hunting is all fun and games.
I love it. Go ahead.
There's no,
talk about that, because I've spoken about it other times as I've been doing it for so long, and everybody sometimes gets carried away with the reality TV version of it and doesn't realize that there's sometimes a very dark side to this type of work.
Yeah, well, and I mean, the big thing here, though, is anytime, when people tell me they want to ghost hunt, I say, "Are you wanting to do it for fun?" And if they say yes, and I say, then go to places like Lemp Mansion and Crescent Hotel and places like that where you can rent a room, take your gear in, and have a good time and go home. But don't take private cases, because the first thing that you learn when you take a private case is people live there and people want answers.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you can't give answers or you don't know what's going on, and then if something does happen, the first thing they're going to say is, "How do I fix it? How do I get rid of it?"
Or you give them the answer that they didn't expect to hear or they want to hear. Sometimes it's works out.
And I mean, and if they're not religious, if they, if they're not the kind of people that they don't believe any kind of a blessing or anything like that's going to work.
Right.
I mean, eventually you come with, face to face with this ugly fact that, we really are powerless to get rid of ghosts. It's one of those things. Most hunters don't want to say it, but we are. There is no physical way that we can remove a ghost from a premises.
Now, let me ask you something on that.
Yeah.
That case that you were talking about. All right. The one. Which, by the way, that thing that you said, that once you got more into the basically working with the family, you realized that there was a darkness there. Sounds like maybe she was blaming it on the land, but maybe there was already something. There was spiritual turbulence walking with this person already to begin with. Do you think it was a ghost? Do you think it was a non-human entity? Do you think it was an elemental tied to the land? What happened as far as or were they in it? Were they hoping that you? It almost sounds part of what you were saying, almost that they wanted you to go in there and validate it for them, but for the sensationalism also. Or did they ever get to the point where they realized, man, we need help, or we need to get rid of this?
It was, it was all of the above of what you just said. first off, yes, the place was really haunted, and I believe it was a regular, ordinary, a ghost haunting a place.
Okay.
But as soon as you would start getting, just to put it in ghost hunting way, you would go there and you would spend the night, right? You would start getting some evidence. You'd interview this lady, and she would tell you straight up, we've never believed in ghosts before. We've never been around something like this before, and we think it's scary. Well, then, and then I would go in the next room and literally pulled a rug up off the bathroom floor, and they had drawn a Ouija board into the bathroom floor.
Okay, so there goes her credibility.
Well, you've never messed with ghosts before.
Yeah.
Where did this come from?
Yeah.
And then they make an excuse about it. And then she'd say, "Oh, well, we just want to get rid of the ghost. We're not doing anything for it." This lady brings me a box, and it has incense in it that was called exorcism.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So,
and then I find a whole stack of books that's on conjuring and witchcraft and ghost hunting, which is not to say, there's nothing bad in these books, but you can't plead ignorance with me.
Right.
And then have all these things.
God, yeah. Like, be honest. Say, hey, you know what? I started reading and dabbling, and now it's gotten away from me. What do I do? Yeah, at least be honest. But then she's trying to. Yeah, I've had cases like that myself, where, it takes them a while to finally fess up, or you get one person that you take them out by themselves and you talk to them, and they kind of like start talking about things, and you're like, okay, like you kind of convince them, hey, I know tell me the truth, don't, like, I'm not here to judge you. I'm just like, tell me the truth. And that's when sometimes you hear the real backstory to what's been going on. So what happened? What did they want from you? What was it that they wanted for you to identify it, or what?
Well, they always told me they just wanted ghosts to go away and them to be free of this thing.
Right.
But I think it was more that they just wanted to be put on the map as having a haunted place and get 15 minutes of fame out of the whole situation, which I never, was keen on giving them. In fact, in the book, I use all aliases and anonymous names just because I'm not going to give it to them.
Right. Well, no, and you know what? I like, again, I myself have run across. That's why when you said, when you tell people, I said, same thing when I've gone to investigations where you need to break the news where, there's really nothing haunted going on here. And they look at you like, yes, there is. And you're like, no, there's not. It's like you got a leaky pipe, or you've got, it's sometimes you tell them not what they want to hear, especially depends on what the outcome is that they want. But let me ask you something. At the end of everything, what happened? Whatever was there stayed there?
Well, what ended up happening was there was actually a young daughter that was in the house, and I think she was the only one that was genuinely disturbed by all the activity that was happening there. There was real activity happening in this place, and the main effect that it was having on everyone was it was making everyone paranoid, that every little thing happening in the house was paranormal. Mm-hmm. And to give you a great example, once when I was sat down on the couch, I was interviewing the woman of the house. She said, well, I know what's here is a demon, and I can tell you because it's watching you right now. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, it's watching you right now. It's on the wall right behind you. And I turned around, and there was a fly on the wall. A regular old housefly.
All right.
And so I kind of waved it off, and I wanted to turn around and go, okay, well, I fixed it. Look, I just knocked it out the door. There, it's gone. But I didn't want to make light of it just because I think that, it was that paranoia, when things are happening and you start, every little thing becomes something scary, every creak, everything,
Right.
So that element was happening there. But I think at the end of the day, she just wanted validation and a little bit of fame, and she didn't give a hoot about getting rid of the ghost.
Right.
I offered to bring a minister in and do a blessing. She said, sure. And I did have an Episcopalian minister come in and do a blessing for her, and he actually had an interesting story after the event because he saw a black mass come out of the floor and go through the ceiling.
Oh.
And it really frightened him.
Right. Yes, and I bet I bet. And see, this is the thing. It makes you think like, and I tell somebody sometimes the effects of, especially a dark haunting like this, where if there's any type of malevolence behind it, like you said, maybe they're acting concerned or scared, but in reality, what they really want is they think this is their ticket. But let's say you left, everybody picks up their stuff and leaves, and they don't realize that the effects of something of a type of dark haunting like this can be very pervasive after the fact, because everybody thinks of the Hollywood effect. 72 hours later, you've got furniture flying in your house, and sometimes it's after everybody leaves, the hoopla dies down, that all these dark things start really coming about. But you know that thing about crying wolf, and I'm not surprised that Episcopalian priest did see that and got scared. Maybe he thought himself, oh, I'm going to go there and do a blessing, and maybe I'm just doing this for the sake of peace of mind for the people that live there. But there's nothing really there.
Yeah. And he was actually pretty open to me telling him about, what I had come across that I felt was, real activity and what was just kind of horse crap.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was with me on the whole, he wasn't, poo-pooing it or anything.
Right.
But I think for sure he never expected to have an experience, in the 20 minutes he was going to be in the place.
Right.
But he called me immediately when it was over and told me all about it, and everything that happened there. So
right.
I think that kind of validated his own belief in ghosts a little bit, though.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, sometimes did she ever, once you finished with this case, did she ever recontact you on a follow-up or anything as to what happened with him?
Well, she got so strung out on drugs, she ended up getting kind of, she had to run away. She ended up moving away. I think she literally ran from the law. And the only one that I actually felt bad for was the children in the house, because they did seem genuinely disturbed by what was happening there. And she was keeping them there and not letting them, go stay with a relative or something like that.
That's
the last I heard, this place, it had got abandoned, and vandals found out about the ghost stories, and they had been in and out and knocked out the windows and just destroyed this almost brand new double-wide trailer thing. So as far as I know, it's sitting there empty, and maybe the ghosts are happy now.
You know what? I'm telling you, chances are, I'm not going to say because I wasn't there, but maybe this thing was something that was walking with her, despite wanting to say that it was the land, a piece of land. Which, by the way, did she pick it? Was there a prior history to that piece of land? Is that why she brought the trailer there, or it was something that belonged, like you said, to her family?
Well, her family had it since probably the early 1900s, and a weird sidebar to this whole story was, she broke down finally and told me she was convinced that the ghost was a black man who had been killed by her father when she was a child, and that he had a shed out back when there used to be an actual shacky little house that was on that land. And him and another guy that lived down the road killed a guy out in their shed.
Oh my God.
And she told me all this, and I'm like, well, you realize, you're telling me about a murder.
Yeah. Yes.
But I'm going to have to report like this to the sheriff's office. And I did. I called the sheriff's office and told him the story. And he told me, if I had $1 for every story I heard about, we're talking about an area of Mississippi during the 1940s.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Probably this story was just way too common.
Right.
And
and all the people involved are either dead or God knows what. In other words, it was like, what evidence? Exactly. All this could be is, I'm
it could
sure
be another layer for horse crap, or it could be absolutely true. It's just
But you know what? I mean, you think about it. Also, that is very dark. Maybe it's something was in her family. Let me tell you something. As a kid, that's got to be very disturbing to be aware that your parent has done something like this. That's pretty, if you're a child, even if this is your parent, come on. It's like, okay. But let me tell you something. I wouldn't be if there was truth to it. Yeah, maybe this was but again, You would think I would never, ever, ever want to come back to this piece of land ever again. You know, family or not, it's like sell it and I'm going somewhere else. Um, you also wrote another book about haunted bridges. And what is that? Are those like like the covered bridges, or are all these some of the? Because I know that sometimes bridges have like how can I say? I know some of them are like urban myths, but then others really have some type of actual verifiable history, dark history attached to them.
Right. And that was actually the biggest problem. That book was actually requested to be written by my publisher, Llewellyn Publishing.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of wanted a book on haunted bridges all over the country.
Right.
And when I was sort of compiling all the stories, that was actually one of the first things I ran into was so many of them are very similar. Like almost every state has a crybaby bridge where someone threw a baby overboard and now they can hear a baby crying at night, that kind of situation. And every state has a bridge where people, usually kids, like to go park their cars and then they say something will push your car across the bridge, or you'll see handprints on the trunk or something like that. And so I actually used those as sort of chapters.
Right.
Like I did a whole chapter on crybaby bridges, a whole chapter on ghosts that are hitchhiking across the
right, like
road.
the Resurrection Mary, that there's that urban legend about, you know, picking up the girl on the side of the road, and you know, when you get to where she disappears, that hitchhiker story. There's different versions of it across the country. You know, a little change here, a little change there, but it's basically the same story.
Absolutely.
When you were, let me ask you, when you were doing that case about the devil in the Delta, did anything affect you personally as an investigator?
No, I don't remember anything other than just the experiences that I had when I was in the place, but I never had anything other than what happened there. There was a brief moment where I was coming home and sort of venting to others about what was happening there, and at one point I did think I woke up at night and I thought there was someone standing beside my bed.
Okay.
And I jumped up and turned the lights on, and there was nothing there. So it could have been nothing, and I never saw anything again. So I probably leaned towards the idea that it was probably nothing. But no, I think all my experiences with that place was pretty much limited to when I was there.
Okay.
And that was pretty typical ghost stuff, a lot of good not even EVPs, because the stuff that was recorded, we heard it in real time.
Okay.
You would actually hear, the rumbles and the booms in the walls. And, one of the guys we had a good old boy there with us. And as soon as those walls started rumbling, he ran out the door and crawled under the trailer because he wanted to make sure that nobody was underneath there shaking the pipes or anything.
Yeah, he was like, man,
kind of situation.
I'm going to bust whoever this is.
Great.
Yeah,
he was great.
Well, you know what? So some people, they're scared, but it's like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
Oh, it was. Yeah, he was scared and excited to figure out if it was true or not at the same time.
Well, you know what? That's more than a lot of people do. There's a lot of people that just leave, like, forget it. It's like, and how about this new book that you're working on, the Disembodied? What is that about?
Okay, well, see, The Devil in the Delta was sort of the book that I wrote I wrote that one, like I said, as a cautionary tale for ghost hunters, because I just think that, a lot of times the ghost hunters don't know really what they're getting into when they take private cases and start diving into the history and happenings and doings, of a private family,
Exactly.
Now, the new book, The Disembodied, is another family that I'm working with in Missouri, a nice lady by the name of Kathy Windsor, and the bizarre hauntings that's happening in her place outside of a very small town called Marston, Missouri.
Okay.
And it has been a heck of a journey working on this case.
Okay. I take it the circumstances of the family are different, and
yeah, this is as almost night and day as you can get. This is a grandmother, a young grandmother, who was she had her granddaughter kind of dumped on her by her daughter who has issues. But the granddaughter is fine, and granddaughter and grandmother have been living in this house for about 2 or 3 months when they started noticing really bizarre things happening. Started as it usually does, with things moving around, bumps, sounds, a voice, but you think it's a TV or the radio.
Okay.
And it kind of came to the big realization was when Kathy woke up and she heard a male voice speaking really quick and almost a whisper, like a coming from her living room. And so she got up thinking, well, somebody's in my house.
Right, yeah.
And she goes to her door, and when she gets to the door, the granddaughter is standing across the hall in the doorway as well, because she's heard it. And they both kind of tentatively walk into the living room, and then it stops the second they walk in the room. But this event was almost like, I'm here, notice me, and things escalated quickly after that. They started having people pull on their covers at night. They'd wake up to see a man standing beside the bed. Bizarre sounds of animal sounds coming from outside, almost like somebody was slaughtering animals.
Oh, God.
Outside the window.
That's...
Then a female ghost starts appearing. And this got me really looking at the area because I kind of know this area well. My grandparents lived there.
Okay.
And I went to the local library, talked to them, managed to track down a fella who lived when an old farmhouse was on the exact same land.
Okay.
And this guy had the stories. Let me tell you.
Yes.
So what we find out is basically, this is 2 generations of a ghost story. We got the people who live there now, and then we have a family who lived there pretty much from the 1920s to the early 1970s that had a lot of shady doings, and a wife who ran off, but the person I spoke to, who's now in his upper 80s, says that he's convinced that his father killed his mother and buried her out in the field. Behind the house.
I mean, I think that happens more often than people think. When back, it's not like now their DNA and stuff like that.
Well, that's true. And I even asked the librarian, this little town Marston is in the middle of nothing, and they live outside the town. And I asked her, I said, well, who would have been, the police then? And it actually took some research to figure out that the only person that would even been considered the law during the 1930s in this area would have been the county constable who was in New Madrid, which is probably, 25, 30 miles away. Right. And in days when most people were still using horse and buggy, that's a haul.
Yeah.
So when people went missing, if it got reported at all, there was probably little to no investigation,
Of course. And the thing was, and the reason, because I wrote one of my books, and it was based, when I was doing research, something similar to that. And the same thing, there was, this was, God, was it Kentucky? I can't remember the state now. Boop. But anyway, it's something similar. They found a lady, she had a cement blocks. This was back in the 1940s, right after World War II. They found her body naked. They had tied cement blocks and dropped her down a mine shaft that had water collected in it. And it was, once they abandoned the mines that, they just stay there. And apparently some of the water had receded, and they found her because her hands, the water was very cold, which is one of the things that preserved her. And her one of her hands that was floating up finally was been seen on the surface of the water. And some boys that were playing in the mines, that's how they found the body. And the sheriff, he brought it out, and they had it trying to, she had very long hair, but she was completely naked, of course, no idea who she was. They tried to match her up with any missing people in the area. A week later, they bury her in a pauper's grave. Bottom line, eventually, they tracked back to some guy. No, I take it back. This was in Illinois. Now that I remember, it was in Illinois. They find her. They were able to get fingerprints, and they track her back because back then, if you worked during World War II in any of the factories, they would take your fingerprints, and that's how they were able to identify her. and they've tracked her back to her husband. And he says, "Mom, she had been married. I'm not kidding. This is like, she was a little bit like on the unusual side. She had been married like 10 times. And he says, no, I thought she had gone back to her family in, I think it was either Louisiana or Florida. She left. I just thought she'd left. And the thought was always that he was the one that had killed her. And to make a long story short, they tried to bring him up on charges, but they never were able to. And I take that back. As a matter of fact, it was right before World War II. And they say that part of the problem with prosecuting him was that then the war came on, and then between, changes of prosecutors and this and that, he never got nothing. And that was the same story, like what we were talking about, that you could say, hey, I thought this person left me. I didn't know that.
Right.
This was a plausible excuse where, like, we know what they call poor man's divorce. You just up and took your stuff and left. But sometimes all you did was leave into 6 feet under the ground is where you went. So yeah, when you're describing that lady, that story, that sounds very plausible.
Yeah, well, and the guy who lived there when he was a child really enlightened me on a lot of things. I mean, he was convinced when I told him about the activity that was happening in the new house, he was convinced it was his father. Oh. And I'll tell you the clincher of it. One of the weird things that's happening in the Windsor House is they would come home from school and work, and one of them would walk into the room, never both of them, and it would change up which one it was, but one of them would come in the room, and they would find big stick on their bed.
Really?
Like just a stick. Uh-huh. And then they would say, did you put a stick in here? No, I didn't put a stick in there. Where did the stick come from? How did the stick get in here?
Right.
And when I was talking to the older gentleman who lived there as a child, and I said, well, one of the weird things happening there is they keep finding these damn sticks on the bed. And he just went pale as a sheet.
Wow.
And I said, what? What? And he said his father would get switches to whip them. And if one of them did something wrong, they would come in the room and they would find a switch waiting for them.
Oh, my God. Talk about
and it was
psychological.
just one of the ways that he would torture them with beatings.
Oh, my God. That's horrible.
Yeah, that's just, and that was just, wow. I was like, wow, that really, filled in some dotted lines there between one, event to another. And there was also, he told us, you go out, because he came by and looked at the house. He didn't want to meet the new family. I don't know why. I think he was embarrassed.
Right.
But he told us, if you go out, look around on the ground, there should be a storm cellar out there. And it actually took about 6 people and about a half a day to find it. But eventually we came to it and opened it up. And they had a storm cellar / where I guess they would put like they canned food, and they would store canned food down in there.
Right.
Some situation. And once we opened that up, that was when the woman started appearing in the house.
I was about to say something happened because of that. Wow.
And so I became sort of convinced, I wonder if he did kill the mom, did he bury her in the bottom of the storm cellar?
Yes. Oh, you read my mind. That's exactly. I'm just, yeah, I hate to say it, but yeah, why not? Why not?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, like I say, it's been, and I'm trying to get all the facts because I'm going back and forth between.
Let me ask you something. So when you said when the grandmother and the granddaughter, they had just moved. In other words, it wasn't like the grandmother, was she living there before nothing happened? Or it just so happened that when they both moved in soon after is when they started having those experiences?
Well, okay, so the original house was tore down in the early 70s, and so the new house was built in the 70s. So it's got that swanky 70s style going on to it,
Right.
And Kathy moved into the place, and she would only live there for maybe 3 or 4 weeks when her daughter brought her granddaughter to her.
Okay,
so she had not been there for very long.
Oh, okay.
When the granddaughter moved in, and she works days, so I could see she could get through 3 or 4 weeks without, and actually she did notice little things. Like she said, she noticed, little booms and knocks, and like she noticed things, were moved, and she just kind of wrote them all off at first.
Right.
It wasn't until it escalated to hearing voices and seeing shadowy shapes standing beside the bed and going past the door in the hallway that she started thinking, okay, there's something happening here,
Absolutely. No, and the reason why I was saying is because I know sometimes people live in properties for years and everything is either quiet, like you said, very subtle, if anything, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, there's a triggering event where then they start having all these things go on, and you're thinking, okay, what happened? But you're telling me she wasn't there long before her granddaughter joined her, so it wasn't like she had been living there for a while and then stuff started happening.
Yeah, and I've never been able to track. I was actually wanting to try to find the people who lived in the house from the 70s until she moved in,
right,
to see if they had any experiences, but I struck out on that end.
Yeah, you know what? That's understandable. That's another thing. Sometimes properties, if they're a rental at any point, that's it. There's no official records. Like you do when you've got a sale, there's a deed or anything. Sometimes, rental properties, they have a swinging door of people staying there, and you never. There's no way to research it unless you happen, like you said, to get a neighbor or somebody. They'll tell you, oh yeah, I know the neighbor. I know who he lived there. There's just no way to track them down. There isn't. There isn't. But that's.
Well, I will say this too. One thing about bringing up your subject of, some people living in a house and having experiences and then others having nothing happen.
Right.
Is one thing that I have learned through all of this ghost hunting stuff is that ghost hunting is an interactive experience. And the more that a person interacts with what's happening in the room, the more that the ghost does things back. And that's how you can escalate something to, where it's finally, making bigger sounds, moving things. If someone lives in a place and they don't believe in ghosts, or even worse, they don't want to believe in ghosts because of religion or whatever, they can ignore everything and write it off as nothing. And with no energy being given back to a ghost, no interactivity, the ghost just goes dormant.
Yes.
And then the very next person can move in the exact same place that notices everything that's happening there. They become interested in the events, which gives energy to the ghost. And then suddenly you've got that interactive energy happening.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, it's more things are happening. And, and I've seen these houses where people tell me all these things that's happening. And now I'll talk to a previous resident. They're like, I lived there 12 years and I never saw a thing.
Yes. Yes.
And, that's why.
Well, yeah, because the truth is that when, like you said, when they have the subtle stuff, they immediately say, "Oh, that's the wind. That's a dog. They don't pay. They don't feed it. In other words, they just dismiss it, and they go on. The other person jumps to
they're not walking around. Yeah, they're not the ones walking around the house going, "Is anyone here?
Yeah,
can you make a sound for me?"
Or that noise. That was the ghost.
Yeah, they're like, "Yeah, it's a house settling."
Right, exactly. Right, and they turn over and they go to sleep. Yeah, that's it. And people don't, and a lot of times, and I've said this, and I know some people because I've had those cases where people get all excited because that's really a ghost, and it's like, you know what? Believe it or not, eventually even though maybe now at this point it might be very subtle or innocent and 9 times out of 10, it goes south for you. It might take a couple of years or maybe even 10 years. But in my experience, it always ends up the humans, if they stay there. Because, by the way, sometimes you never find out about it, but they actually end up leaving. It starts to ramp up, especially after doing what you just described, where they feed it. They invited it. They wanted the communication. They gave it. And then all of a sudden, it starts taking a dark turn. Things like that.
Right.
And then it's like, yeah, good luck on pulling out of that nosedive. And then their answer, of course, is to move away. So.
Right. And I think actually can go two ways. It can go the way that you just described, where your only recourse is just to move.
Yeah.
But then you could also be like me and my childhood bedroom closet, where it becomes so blasé, everyday event, that you pay it no mind whatsoever. And so once again, you're sort of removing that interactive energy from the event, and
Right.
it just becomes mundane.
But exactly like what you said, you didn't pay attention to it. It got to the point that
Yeah,
it just faded into the background. You weren't waiting
yeah,
there or saying, "Hey ghost, what's your name? Tell me what's your name," or
well,
anything like this. But there's a lot of people that
well,
get into this communication, and then once they've, like, got that thing boiling, because now they've been trying to communicate with it, they even got fear
sure,
depending, then
yeah. Well, I think, and there's definitely that line you can cross into obsession
oh
where
yes,
you're becoming just a little too obsessed with what's happening.
yes,
And I think that's where usually it can turn a dark corner.
yes, yes. And most people, and I tell you, if you ever do work as an investigator, I said most of the investigators that I know that have done this for a while, everybody once in a while, especially if you've had a very dark case, for lack of a better word. In other words, there was something there. You take a sabbatical. You step back from it. You go, I'm going to take a little bit of time off from this, just for a bit, because
Absolutely.
it can bleed over into your regular life, and you don't want that. And
That's right.
like you said, then there's some people that become obsessive about it, or they live there, and then they want to, like, and sometimes I think really that besides when they start getting into that communicating, they start not only communicating with what's there, but they start calling in other stuff. Okay. And then that's when it gets really interesting, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Well, again, that's kind of moving into that obsessive territory where you're obsessing over what's the things that's happening a little too much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that could always kind of go in some bad directions.
Yes.
And for the Windsor family, she decided for her and her granddaughter, the best thing she could do would be, probably to move away.
Right.
Which I totally understand, especially having a young girl that you're raising, and you don't
Yes.
want to raise, but the other part of this too is I always tell people, one of the reasons why so many times people jump, like in The Devil in the Delta, where they jump to the idea of some sort of a inhuman presence in the place, is because people still seem to have a hard time understanding that if you're dealing, like in the case of the Disembodied,
Right.
a man probably killed his wife and would beat his kids and was a horrible person.
Yeah.
When you have a horrible person who dies, well, guess what kind of ghost they are?
He's a horrible dead guy.
I mean, they don't suddenly become a great, ghost.
Yeah. Exactly.
They're a horrible spirit.
Yes.
They're a malevolent spirit, in the
Yes.
place. If you have a loving woman who loved the place so much she stuck around after death, sure, she's probably a nice ghost. She's there just
Right.
but she loves the house. She never wanted to leave. But you can run into bad ghosts, and you can have bad experiences from ghosts. And I would be the last person to ever fault someone for saying, I think living in a place with a bad ghost is just not for me.
You know what? And I applaud what you're this guy this as far as this lady moving away, because people don't realize the effect that this can have on a child
For sure.
living there. Because this is what I tell people, sometimes, especially the people that get all excited, or because I as a matter of fact, my last book was called Supernatural Safety, and I talk about stuff that people can do. I said, you know what, even if you get clergy or an investigator, at the end of the day, they're going to pack up their stuff and they're going to go. They got to go home. They got their lives. You're the one that's got to stay there and handle this or deal with this on a day-to-day basis, plus live, go to work, go to school, whatever the case might be. But I know, and from my own personal experience as an investigator, this can be really hard on kids. Okay.
And on the other side of that too is also, let's say that the ghost was a religious person when they were alive, and a minister comes in and does a blessing, and it works.
Right.
It drives the ghost. It's like, bye, I'm leaving. Being the fact that they're a ghost, and you live in the place, you never really know that. You're never going to get that, ding of the bell that confirms, yeah, they left. And if you've had horrible experiences in this place, you're always going to be thinking to yourself, it's just waiting to come back.
It's called paranormal PTSD. PTSD.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
So, when it's successful, 9 times out of 10, the best thing you could probably do is still leave.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And you know what? I've had cases like that where the family, everything's basically quieted down, but and I'm going to say the consideration has always been then when there's kids in the family, and they say, you know what,
That's right.
We realize, but that every little noise now, you're like thinking, oh, instead of thinking the normal stuff, your kid is, in other words, you're thinking just to make them happy so that they go to sleep at night and not wonder if every noise they hear is the thing or whatever. I've got to move away because of that. Not because they're running away per se. But people, family and individuals, they suffer from PTSD. It's depending on the level of what happened or how long. Sometimes it's surprising how long people put up with this stuff before they ask for help. I've heard of that it's like, I can't wait that especially if they've tried for some time to get rid of it and nothing had worked, and finally they're able to dislodge it, whatever it is that they ended up doing, that I want to say, you can't help it. You're always waiting. Is any minute is that thing going to come back?
That's it. Yeah, and you could, because you're never going to get that 100% confirmation that it's over.
Right. Well, because you can't see it like a tangible thing that it's, you couldn't see it to begin with, in other words. But yeah, I've seen that happen.
That's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to explain to someone, that's been, fed a steady diet of, ghost television and horror movies.
God, yes, and
and
I tell everybody and nowadays, there's so many, because back in the, like you said, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I want to say, a lot of the ghost stuff was, the worst thing that came out was when The Exorcist came out in the 70s, and all these innocent moviegoers got shocked. But besides that, the ghost shows were very, like you said, in search of, and sightings. It was very, historical places. It wasn't really meant to, like, and it was usually, it wasn't that, like that story about what you just described was the setting for maybe who's haunting that place, which is very dark, by the way, when you think about it. As far as, a family and then, the people that live there, and like you said, that once they're dead, that doesn't make them any better. Sometimes it even makes it even worse. A dark haunting, like you said, it doesn't have to be demonic or non-human. It's just a dark spirit, as in the mind, the mentality, the awareness that's there. People that and I say it, and I'm glad you brought up that point, Rich, because I've got an investigation, and you hear people, because they get a bad feeling. And they immediately jump to the conclusion that it's non-human. And I say, you know what? Haven't you ever met somebody that you really felt like, man, I need to get away from this person. This is a bad person. Because they make you feel uncomfortable. I go, now take that person and make him dead and a ghost. And basically you're reacting the same way that you would because you're around a person that maybe is psychopathic or sociopathic. And your alarm bells are going off, your instincts. Well, he's got the same characteristics as a dead guy. You just can't see it or see him that, embodied. But you still get that your alarm, your internal normal person alarm bells are going off saying, you know what, you need to get out of here, or you feel uncomfortable, or you feel that sense of dread, that kind of deal. But it's still a human spirit.
Sure. Once a bully, always a bully.
Yeah, of
course. That's, they're not going to magically become nice, now that they're dead and sticking around.
No, they're not. Anyway, Rick, people sometimes, like I said, sometimes they jump to that D word, which I think is overused too quickly, much too quickly. That's much rarer than people people are aware of. But anyway,
it is, but it's a disservice. It's a disservice on both ends, because it doesn't help with the ghost cases, and it doesn't help, in the cases where that could possibly be happening for real, because it trivializes it.
Of course it does. Of course it does. Let me ask you, when is the book? This sounds like a really fascinating book. Do you have an idea, a release date for it?
I would usually it's about a 4 or 5 month turnaround. So I would probably guess early spring. The Disembodied.
Yes.
Like I said, I'm wrapping it up now, so I would probably see it coming out sometime early next year.
Early next year. Okay. All right. And like I
Sure.
said, I'm going to include a link to your websites on the credits of the show. But if for the podcast listeners, if you want to give out your website addresses again, so people can follow up
Yeah,
with
I
you.
mean, for the ghost stuff, Paranormal Incorporated, all spelled out.com.
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff on there from Devil in the Delta. There's case stuff. You can listen to EVPs. You can watch videos. All kinds of different things on there.
Perfect. Great. Fantastic. Rich, I want to thank you so much. It has been absolutely fascinating to speak to you, and I want to wish you the best of luck on all of your projects.
The same to you, and I'll come on any time. Just give me a
I
shout.
would love to. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Wasn't he an interesting guest? See? And I'm glad he brought that up about, because I've talked about it before, that people experience these dark hauntings and they immediately think it's a demon. And it's not. It's not. There's a lot of dark human beings, psychopaths, sociopaths, people that have done really horrible things when they were alive. And he made a very good point. I've talked about it before. When these people die and they hang out for whatever reason, they're afraid, they are the same person they were. The darkness that's with them, that made them a horrible human being, is still there. The characteristics are still there. Or like he said, this is a person. Let's assume it's true. This story about that he might have killed and buried his wife in a root cellar and used to psychologically terrorize his kids by putting out a switch and and then beating them. Okay. That do you really think that this person overall they were a horrible in other words, if you think that this type of personality only specifically picked on his wife and his kids, no, this person probably tried to victimize anything and anybody it could, animals, other people that it could. And you listen to it, there's a psychopathic flavor to it, which is because what they thrive on is control. And I thought it was kind of interesting if you go with that story where once they opened up that cellar that they located it is when they started seeing this woman's ghost. Maybe her thing was, nobody knew the real story of what happened to me. Maybe he even told, who knows, maybe he, of course, told everybody she ran away, told even maybe her kids, she ran away, even though they might have suspected differently. And this was her one chance of saying, that's not what really happened. I was killed. And he told everybody I ran away. And he never paid the price for that. Or my children thought I left them. I abandoned them. And I didn't. So, I mean, there's a lot of... and again, this is, like he said, this location, the actual structure was demolished and something was raised in it in the 1970s. And this comes back to people that have these houses that, let's say if you were able to only go back to the structure that was built in the 70s and nothing happened. Just regular people lived, moved away, nothing ugly, nothing weird. That's when the research kind of leads you to the right direction, which is something that happens on the land. In other words, the fabric of what's there, even though that physical structure is no longer there, it's bled into the ground. Those heavy emotions, especially when you're talking that maybe this family lived there for years and years and years, and God knows what took place there. If this is what the neighbors knew about, there was things maybe that nobody knew about. Like he said, the closest law was miles and miles and miles away, which means you could just do just about anything. And unless they caught you actually pulling the trigger or doing the deed, yeah. And I hate to say it, this is the time where a lot of times citizens would take the law into their own hands, sometimes for the better or for the worse. Because if they were in a rural area where you had to wait for the law to show up, it was like, hey, we need to address this. And sometimes it was well deserved, and other times it had horrible results. Because basically what you're talking about is being a vigilante. But if you don't think that story played out countless times all across the country, especially, like I said, in these rural areas where maybe they were miles even from a town, and there was nobody there to, step in and say, deal with a personality like this. And who is going to say no? No, that's not true. Let's say you kill your wife, but nobody really realizes she's missing because, God, she would go for days and days and maybe not be seen. And what if a neighbor thinks, man, I haven't seen, let's call her Mabel. I haven't seen Mabel in a few weeks. If this guy's a real piece of work, which it sounded like he was, you don't think maybe the neighbors might have said, man, there's something up, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to get in this guy's crosshairs. Next thing I know, I might be having a problem with him. That happened quite a lot. As a matter of fact, in that book that I wrote called The Lady in the Blue Kimono, which talks about all these different types of murders, there was one of the stories, and by the way, these are all verified stories. One of them was, this happened in the Ozarks, and Lake of the Ozarks, and they found 2 mutilated women's bodies dumped there. And they were mutilated in such a way so that they would not be identified. Like, they had one the head cut off, the other one part of the head. Even though they originally, after examination, they had been hit with a shotgun. After the fact, they were mutilated, trying to disguise their identity, which up to a certain point worked, because they were taken, I think it was to Columbia University or something, and they were kept. They were trying to find out who these women were. And of course, the police, what do they do? This happened, I want to say, in the 1930s. First thing they do, of course, is look for missing people report. Is there anybody, 2 women, that are reported missing? There was no reports. Finally, this man contacts the police and says, hey, you know what? I haven't heard from my stepmom. Apparently, he had a really good relationship with his stepmother. I haven't heard from my stepmother for weeks. And I heard you guys found a couple of women. Turns out this was their first lead. And sure enough, they were able to identify them. They go back to the farm, and it was a daughter and a mother who lived with the daughter's husband on this farmhouse. Now, what do you think he says when the police come to him and he goes, oh no, they're visiting family in Florida and Texas. Then they go off like that every once in a while, and then I don't hear from them. Sometimes they don't even tell me who they're visiting in these states. They're over there. They're not dead. Go check it out. They're going to find them. Okay. My point being, eventually the story is, it got proven that he did kill them. And he did go to jail. He did die in jail. He appealed it and everything. But if it wasn't for the fact that the older woman's stepson contacted, 2 or 3 months later, contacted the police and said, I haven't heard from my stepmother. This is really unusual for her. Oh, and then, by the way, then after that, they got other people, they got a hold of their dog. But in other words, they could only work this back to verify who these women were once they kind of had an idea who they were. In other words, they went back to doctors, when the lady had been, once had an operation for a gallbladder, and there was a visiting nurse who had come to her, and they contacted the doctor and the visiting nurse, and they said, look, these are the particulars. She has no head, but these are, they were able to correspond things on her body, like her scarring of the surgery and other things about her body that they kind of knew for sure. But still, if it wasn't for the fact that this one man contacted, this murder would have remained a mystery. Nobody would have gone to jail for it. And that would have been the end of that. Because this guy was saying, oh no, they go off and visit their family in these other states and they're gone for months. And supposedly, believe it or not, this was the reason why he ultimately killed them, was because they would leave and nobody was there taking care of him. And apparently the wife had wanted to divorce him more than once because I guess they had a rocky marriage. And she had, as a matter of fact, she had put in a divorce proceedings only a few months before she withdrew it. But she had told somebody, well, the next time he's not going to find me. I guess maybe he hunted her down and convinced her to come back. So already and he just got fed up and he killed them both. And I think he died in 1978. And he appealed it and everything. But yeah, that scenario that you might think, wow, that's so over the top of, killing somebody and nobody knows about it. Or saying, yeah, that person, they just took off, they left, or they ran off with the lover. Yeah, sometimes that happened, but a lot of times this was a really easy way to get out from being charged with murder. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of good ghost stories. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of pieces of land that people, they build structures on, and then they had some really weird and dark hauntings, and they look at the actual history of the structure. They can't come up, but it's what happened on that land. Okay, that's really the true origin of the paranormal events that are taking place. So, yeah. And sometimes it's really impossible to know. Because 9 times out of 10, let's face it, somebody buries a body somewhere, they're not going to put up a marker and say, by the way, this is the place, where I dumped that body, or this was my dumping ground, or I did away with my wife or my husband or my kid or my this, and this is where I buried them. Now, on the contrary. But anyway, guys, I urge you to check out Rich's website. Maybe now after the new year when that new book comes out, Disembodied. It sounds like a very interesting case. And thank you very much for being part of my audience and coming back every week. I've got a lot of great show guests coming on, a lot of interesting things. And thank you so very much for coming back again and again. Take care.